Okay, so we're going to continue Hilchos Niddah, Siman Kuf Tzadik Ches, discussing the various kinds of chatzitzas. In preparation for Tevilah, this is an important area of halachas, many details of how a woman prepares herself. Even though the preparation is in the next Siman involving chafifa, and how she washes herself and makes sure there's nothing on her, we have to see what does constitute a chatzitza, something that blocks the water from getting through, because it could render her tevilah not kosher tevilah, and she may have to go back inside again. So there are various gedorim, various concepts that we covered last time, whether it's a question whether the chatzitza is on a part of her body, if it's in roiv gufoy, whether it's a derais or derabanan. It makes a difference whether there is hakpada, if an individual is makbid or not on it. And of course it also depends on something called botlo dato itzel acherim, which I briefly brought up, which Ilan, I think you asked for some examples. I recall some examples of what does it mean that if someone cares or is makbid on something, but nobody else cares, nobody else is makbid. And of course it makes a difference here in these halachas too, because it could be a very individual thing, that for certain things she is makbid, they are not, they are, she is not makbid. And hakpada is one of those concepts that are very much related to these halachas, because if something is really insignificant, or if it's has become part of the body, does not really block the water from getting through, even though it's out there, people are not makbid, then we're not going to make a big issue of it. But what if, she is not and the rest are? Or she is and the rest are not. So we just introduced the concept of botlo dato, or botlo das odom, dato shel odom, on the das of acherim. In other words, his opinion, the opinion of one individual, is botlo, does not really matter, does not really count when you consider the dat, the opinion, or the feelings, or the minhag of the rest of the world. And there are various examples in halacha, just a few of them that come to mind. In Hilchos Shabbos, Gabes Chita, squeezing the juice out of a fruit. As you know, that's not permissible on Shabbos, even though the ones that are minatora not permissible are just grapes and olives, from which the juice traditionally was made, the real juice. Whereas everything else, all other fruit, it would depend on if people make juice or not. Or what if you have a situation where one guy likes to make a juice from a particular fruit that nobody else makes juice from? So you see, you would have here an hanhaga, or a habit or a custom of his that, this fruit he makes juice out of. So would that be a problem? Would he be able to do it or not? So it's a machlokes. Do we say botlo datoi or not? Does his opinion, does his das matter or not? Some say it does not. Some say it's bottle. In other words, even though he's doing here something that apparently is asur, but in general it's not accepted as an isur. So, do we rule differently for him? Or do we say since the ruling for everybody else is one thing, he basically gets that ruling, he follows that ruling? Another example is, it's brought down in one particular area of Bavel, they used to wear, or not really wear, carry something on their head. There are places in the world that they do that. Is that called derech hoitzah or not? Is that called a normal way of carrying? And the rest of the world doesn't carry like that. I mean, in America here, they don't carry on their head. In some places in Africa they do. In the Arab lands they do. So, is that considered botlo daton? In other words, that their das is bottle in relation to the das of everybody else. Because this is perhaps not derech hoitzah. Just because for them it is derech hoitzah, that's the way they ordinarily carry, by putting something on their head, does that mean that it would be also for them? Or, we're not saying here lechatchila, people should carry that way, but is it derech hoitzah or lo derech hoitzah? Since for them it is normal. Well, even though for them it is normal, for the rest of the world it's not, so it's botlo data. You have also the example of Kviyah Suda, where the Gemara discusses it to be Kviyah Suda as far as making Birkas HaMazon, when you sat down and had a meal, right? Even though it was mezon, it wasn't bread. This is a concept of being Kviyah Suda. And the question is, Gabi Kviyah Suda for wine. nobody's kovea suda on wine, just on wine, sits down to just have wine. So you're not going to say Birkas Hamazon on that, even though he's kovea suda. But what if somebody does? He is kovea suda on that. He's a Frenchman and he likes to sit down and have a kovea suda. So we say botlo dato. In other words, the fact that he does it doesn't mean that the halacha will be different for him. The halacha follows the general tzibur. Right? The rest of the world does not do that, or most of the rest of the world does not do that. Therefore, the halacha is like the rest of the world, not like this one individual. In the first few seifim, we basically discussed certain types of chatzitzas that could be on the hair, all kinds of strings, and we didn't really get into all the various other kinds of things that can be on the body. But the common denominator was that things that are very tight on the hair, things that don't let the water go through, or jewelry on her body, that they make it hard for the water to get through, that for sure is going to be a problem. So it depends, it's going to also depend on the gather that we called rifyoin, how loose something is. That will also determine whether something is a chatzitza or not. Even though we said that for the most part we are machmir to take everything off and not to take a chance that it's tight and not loose enough. In Sif Hey, we're talking about a prevalent problem. And I'm calling it a prevalent problem, as you will see, because the nature of women's hair, if it's long, is to have knots. It just happens that that's where they need to comb themselves a lot. They sometimes braid the hair. So it's just something that is quite common. And there's quite a few opinions here, quite a few halachas as to how to deal with it. The Rambam, if you recall from last shir, brings down the Shitas Egonim, even though he doesn't hold like them, that the hair is considered a separate entity, and if therefore roiv of the hair on the head, at least on the head, had some sort of chatzitza, then it's called roiv. In other words, even though we said last time roiv, it can be understood roiv of the body, of the goof, the Goyim say when we say roiv, it could be roiv of the hair too, because the hair on the head is treated by itself, as its own entity. Begabe chatzitzas. So if there's a chatzitza and a roiv of the hair, and of course people are makbid on it, then it would be a problem. It would be a chatzitza min Torah. Even though the Rambam is choylek on that, if you recall, the Rambam says roiv means everything together, not just roiv on the hair and roiv on the body. So what does the Mechaber say? Let's see. The Chaber seems to be holding like the Geoinim. In Sif Hey he says, Shtei se'arais o yoiser, shehoyu kshurim ke'echot kesher echot enam chotitzin. If it all depends, he says. If all you have is two hairs or more that are shurim together, one knot, that's not a chatzitza. Now that's going to be very interesting, because we're going to soon see that even though you have a couple of hairs, and the couples of hair don't present a problem, one hair is a more difficult situation than two or more. And we have to understand why. But for the meantime, all it says here is that if you have two or yoiser, shoyu kshurim ke'echot, tied together, knot as a knot, in one kesher, they're not choitzes. So, pshat over here is that even though you have these two by themselves, or these two are tied to other two, as we're going to see in the Ramah, it won't make that much of a difference. This amount of knots, or this kind of a knot, does not present a problem. As the Ramah says, "Ve'ein chiluk beinim kosher beis se'aros im shtei se'aros, or shekosher beis se'aros b'fnei atzmon." In this scenario, it doesn't really make a difference whether the two hairs are tied to themselves or tied to other two hairs. It's okay. However, v'sa'aro achas, one hair shenikshero, that is tied by itself even, chotzetzes, it does present a chetzitza v'hu shetehem makpedes aleh, as long as of course she's makped on it. But in eina makpedes aleh, if she's not makped on that, also la tefillah, then the tefillah does count, unless ad sheyeh rov se'aro kosher nimo b'fnei atzmo, until all, or actually say the majority of her hair is tied strand by strand by itself. So again, we're going back to roiv. Once you have roiv, it doesn't make a difference what she says. On one, it depends if she's makpedes. But wait a minute. All right, I can understand the importance or the idea behind makpedes. But why should there be a difference between one hair? One is less then 2. If the 2 does not present a problem, then why does 1 present a problem if it's a knot? Well, the Mechaber somewhat insinuates by saying the words V'hu sheteh makpedes. Several hairs together, the women may not be makped, first of all. 1 by itself, there may be. Now, does that make any sense that they should be makped on 1 and not on more? Well, it's a personal thing, but it's more than that. It's not just an idea of makpedes. It also is because the Forshim explain, the Poskim say, that when you have several hairs tangled together, the water gets through easier than if it's 1 hair that is tied as a knot. So in Sa'aro Achas Shenikshara, it would present a chatzitza, especially if she's makpid, which she may be, because of the way it is. It's 1 hair that is just bothering her. Whereas if several hairs are tangled together somehow, it may not be such a big deal.
If the Mechaber is saying 2 or more,
right,
is he putting an upper limit on this?
Well, the upper limit was still the same.
The upper limit seems to be wrong.
Yeah.
So you could have a braid or a pigtail not constituting roiv,
right,
and it would be knotted together.
Right. When you had
previously had
right. When you have many hairs, apparently they're not so tied together in such a way
but
that the water will not get through.
He would allow, so long as it's not roiv,
yeah,
a braid or a pigtail.
Yeah. But we will.
That's a knot.
Yeah.
Okay, which is weaved together.
Right.
Okay. Yet we know you're not allowed to do that.
Well, obviously today we're careful with anything like that.
No, but on his logic,
right,
right. He would seem to permit this, so long as it's not roiv to hair.
Right, because a couple hairs together will not make a difference. We will soon see, however, that it depends on what part of the body, and it also makes a difference whether the hair is tied or whether the hair is dovuk, sticky together. That's going to make a little bit of a difference in the next seif. But for the time being, all we know is that 1 on its own, or to another even, as the Shach learns, would be asur, would be a chatzitza, and several would be less of a problem. The Prisha brings down here a suffix, he's mistapik, according to the Shittas HaGoinim, if when we're talking about the hair, are we only talking about that the hair is considered its own entity? Is that only on the hair on the head, or does it apply to any place where there's kinus seyar, like under the armpits? And we'll talk about the armpits soon. But he has a question about the sheet of Gonim that say roiv would make a difference. Is roiv only on the hair of the head, or does it mean also the hair in other areas of the body? But anyway, since we mentioned armpits, the Poskim write that the chatchila, a woman should comb herself there too, so that there shouldn't be any knots. But the evet, we're not so makrid there. What's with the evet? Sometimes it could be that she had to go to the mikveh on Friday night, and on Shabbos you can't do these things, to comb and to unknot. So she just didn't manage to do it. She didn't comb herself. Is it okay? So you can rely on the Shulchan Aruch. The Shulchan Aruch, as we'll see, says that in this particular case, it's okay. It's not choitzitz under the armpits. All right. In Seif Vav, Seir shekeneged alev v'shebezakan anidbak. Now, what's interesting here is that you have several seifim here where he actually mentions what may or may not be a chatzitza for a man, even though this is mostly halachas for a woman, but it's part of the same Mishnah, and the halacha does concern men too in certain situations, if they were, tmeim, and they needed to go to the tevilah. So seir shekeneged alev, the hair that's on the area of the heart, the chest area, v'shebezakan, or on the beard.
That's why you said.
That's right. Hanidbak ze bazeh machmat ze'ah, that is glued to each other, stuck to each other, because of sweat. Chotzetz, that is a chatzitza. So nidbak ze bazeh, in some ways is worse than a kesher. It's so stuck to each other because of the sweat, like glued, that this does present a problem of chatzitza. Sheberosh v'shebebet hashechi, if it's on the head or under the armpits. Remember, we're talking about nidbak ze bazeh here, not knots. Eino choitzetz, it does not present a problem of chatzitza. What is that? Armpits. Yeah. So here we see the Mechaber clearly say that even though they're very close, They're almost like glued to each other. Under the armpits and the head, it's not a problem. And we'll see why. What about shebe'oisa makom, in the groin area? So he says, be'ish eino choitzes, for a man it's not a problem. Ube'isha, for a woman, benesua, if she's married, choitzes, it is a chatzitza, bepnuya eino choitzes. If she's still single, it's not choitzes.
Single women are...
Remember in the days where they had tahara? Yeah, or, some other kind of situation where she needed to be toivel. No, she's single, he's asking. Yeah. There are certain situations in which she would be toivel. So, for a woman, today, generally speaking, single women do not toivel. Right. That's correct. They should be discouraged from doing it too, for good reasons. So, in that area, down below, for a woman, it would make a difference if she's married or not. Now, what's going on over here?
Does that imply difference of tahara?
No. What's going on here is the reason why there's a chiluk here between men and by women bichlal, whether she's single or married, is because, getting back to the original concept we discussed, hakpada. A married woman is makpid on how she looks in certain parts of her body. So for her, she would be makpid if things are not the way she wants it to be. Do you know that certain countries where Jews lived, their custom was, or their preference, I should say, was to shave that area, that hair? The women would shave themselves in that area of the body. You haven't heard of that, huh?
Sure, that's actually here also quite.
Is it? I know they shave their legs.
It's a matter of personal.
Exactly, right. I know the legs. I've heard about.
It's not uncommon.
Right. I know the legs. I know the mustache. Right. But other parts of the body?
The opposite, are they that way today too?
They do? Okay. So there you have it. So you see, there's a certain preference. Maybe that's the best word for it. There's a certain preference among certain women, certain countries, certain places, where they are makpid, or they prefer it done that way. So here the Mechaber just says that there's a difference between married and single women as far as that location on the body.
When we're talking about makpid, we're talking about in an area or the world, or it's just that locality? It makes a big difference.
No, here in the example of the Mechaber, we're not talking about different countries. We're just talking about the difference between a married and a single woman
but
concerning the hair down there below.
You said women are makpid about how they look, right?
Right.
Okay.
Uh-huh.
They shave their legs. They
Sure. Uh-huh.
Do we say that women are concerned about this because this is a worldwide issue or just a local issue?
Well, in general, women are concerned about the way they look. We know that.
The question
Right.
is, when we talk about little data,
Bottle data, yeah.
right, little data, is that an issue for, let's say, different from the United States and, let's say, Mexico, or just, let's say, Los Angeles versus the rest of the United States? How local do we say the road? How big an area are we talking about?
Yeah, that's also,
The Jews
that's a question that is discussed in the Halacha. Is one city, if a whole region does it that way, do we still say Batla Datana? It's a question.
The French and the Italians might do things differently than
Right.
the French and California.
Yeah, it could be that just for them, it would, that would be the Halacha. So you're right. That's discussed in,
Okay.
Yeah.
So do we have also a thing, Batla Dato also by women? There's
Oh, sure, we've been talking about it.
I think that
When we talk about
not
Bittul,
very
right. What is it?
forceful in insisting on their
Yeah.
opinion.
Well, we did say that it would make a difference. If she's makbid some of the times and they're never makbid, or they are makbid always and she only sometimes, there are different halachas here that we discussed last time as to what do we do. So, but generally we follow the trend, the majority, in considering the halacha here.
And are we following a Jewish trend in an area or the world around?
The world trend.
The world trend.
General world trend. Yes, exactly.
There could be a big difference.
Yes, of course. Yeah. So here we have a little bit of a difference between hair that's very, very sticky versus knots in the hair. In that, in the head or under the armpit, it's not going to be choitzes. On the chest area, the zakon and the beard, it will be choitzes. Down below the groin area, by a man, in a choitzes because he doesn't care, he doesn't mind. To him, it makes no difference how it looks down there. By a woman, it will make a difference if she's nesua, if she's married, and it will not make so much of a difference if she's a pnuya, single, and therefore, since it does not matter so much to her, eino choitzes. So that's the chalukah that we make. That is what we look at. Are they makbid? Who is makbid? Now, then the Ramah brings here something that is very esoteric, if you know what I mean by that.
We're about to find out.
And I did some research on that, as much as I can find out. Those that have braids, small braids, but appear to be like braids in their hair, that are very dvukos, very much attached to each other, and this happens through a shade, through a demon that does it somehow to them. And it's actually, tradition says that it's dangerous to remove them. Lo chaytzi, these are not chayet, these are not choitzitz. In other words, these do not constitute a chatzitza. Now, you wonder to yourself, what's this? And I assure you that whoever goes through this halacha, this Ramah, probably is going to either skip it, go through it quickly, and not stop to think too much about it.
Well, since King Solomon, the shindalas are banned.
Oh no, they're all around. I know firsthand that they. Oh yeah. I know. Let's just say I know a lot about it. They're not banned. No, it's a big mistake to think that way. Anyway, what is this in English? Believe it or not, there's a name for this. It's called witch knots or fairy knots. Now, is there a difference between fairy knots and witch knots? I'm not an expert. I don't know if they're exactly the same thing, if they're from the same source. But apparently, it is something that is, how should I say, known, or was known in the past, but without getting into too much detail as to why they call it that or how it was formed. Let's just say that it could be that this Ramah is somehow related to what the non-Jewish world calls fairy knots or witch knots. Okay. In other words, even though you may think that this is superstitious, and maybe, that's what it was, when you deal with kishuf, witchcraft, you don't minimize something like this. You don't treat it as superstition, because I don't know if I should talk too much about witchcraft here now. But,
Oh, sure.
Yeah. But there is a type of witchcraft or a spell that can be done through the tying of someone's hair or making a knot. It is, in other words, there is some truth to that. So I wouldn't call this completely superstitious. And that is why he says, it's according to their tradition, it was a sakana to remove this particular knot if it was on the hair. Now, why is he telling this to us? He's saying that even though we've said before that certain things that people are makbid on the hair would be a chatzitza, and of course they would be makbid on something like this too. No, a woman does not want to have all these knots. However, because they know it's a sakana, that there's several explanations. One of them is because they know it's a sakana, then it's like they're not makbid. In other words, they basically will live with it. Anyway, if you need any ideas of how to remove knots and easily any kinds of, there's all kinds of advice on the internet, with oil, with shampoos, and with water, and all kinds, other than just cutting it.
How much do we have to be concerned? You said that the shadim are all around.
Yes.
How much do we need to be concerned over this?
In an urban city, you usually don't have to be concerned. In a rural place, if you're by yourself at night, you need to be careful. There are ways to protect yourself, let's just say that way, and there are things that can draw them even to a city. I'll just give you a quick example that is actually brought down in Halacha. Or I don't know if it's Halacha, the typical Halacha, but it's brought down in the books that discuss this area, this field of I guess, metaphysical phenomena. You sometimes can have a situation where a child, and I've had this, I know from speaking to people who had this problem, where a child all of a sudden sees something in his bedroom. And he's not lying. He's actually afraid. A normal, healthy, good child. He sees something that appears to him like a monster, Shaitan had different forms and shapes. And the reason why he's seeing or experiencing this, as opposed to most people in their homes who don't see things like that, is because that room used to have a window that was closed off. And unless you open up another window, you will have trouble. You may potentially have trouble in that room if that original window that was closed off was through where the shaitan used to go out from. If that was their regular, call it freeway, passageway, and you close that off, even though they can find some other way of getting out, it bothers them. You're infringing on their territory. And they may have been there before that house was built. As soon as you open up another window, make a hole, small hole in the wall. You'll solve that problem. Now, most people don't know about these things because most people don't deal with this area of I guess, how should we call it, of phenomena. So they're not aware. It's not
something we don't normally do in the Ashkenazim.
Oh, no, exactly. Yeah. See, in the olden days, we talk about 200 years ago or more, even the Ashkenaz were familiar with these things. There's an Yiddish term called Upsprechen, which means to dispel an Ein Hara, to remove it. And there's several ways to do it, one with lead and one with a certain prayer. And the average Ashkenaz Jew today is not familiar with these things. And not only is he not familiar with the Yiddish, he doesn't even know what an Ein Hara is, that you can remove it and how to remove it. Sephardim are a little bit more sensitive to that. They somehow have it in their family. They recall something like that. They still don't know what to do about it, but they're afraid of it. Is this something to be concerned about? Yes, because the Gemara says you should be concerned about it, about Ein Hara. Whereas Kishuf, witchcraft, which is a problem sometimes, and again, it's only because I've been actually involved in know firsthand of people who've had this kind of a problem, where it's been authenticated, not suffix, a doubt, that I know it's still a problem. That I know it's not just witches in the past. It's actually people doing terrible harm to others through these kinds of means, which is a tremendous avera. And there's very few people that know how to take care of it and how to deal with it. Sometimes it's very difficult to undo. There's a whole, I can tell you a lot about this topic. There's a whole marketplace, or more than one marketplace in Mexico, that sells all the ingredients you need for Kishuf. All kinds of dead cadavers of different kinds of animals and potions. So this is not a superstition. This is a big problem out there. It's something that's also for the Jew. But sometimes you have to know how to defend yourself from it and what to do about it if that is the problem. Who to go to, who to see. And in Yore Deah, there's actually some halachas of when you can contact these types of individuals that are familiar with the ways of Kishuf and Shaitim and the like.
We're generally told that the Shaitim have been banished, the Kishuf doesn't exist anymore, that it's all sleight of hand and hocus pocus.
But it's not true. Let me tell you, just briefly, because this is a whole different topic. Let's put it this way. It was much more known and much more common and seen and experienced in the past. Yes. It's still around, they're not banished, and they're not gone, and so forth. However, there is some sort of tradition that in Israel, they don't present, they don't appear, they don't come, they don't enter, unless they've been brought in, they've been called to come. So it could be that in Israel, they're not as seen or as people do not experience that phenomenon as much as outside of Israel. I can tell you, I've spoken to people that I know are trustworthy, who've had first-hand experience, who saw them, who experienced it. Whether it was in Burma, Iran, Yemen, right? In all these countries where if you ask anybody from the street, Jew or not, they'll tell you, of course. They're never going to say, it's not true, discounted, they've been banished. In Western countries like the United States or in Europe, you don't hear as much about it because this is a very, progressive lifestyle with technology and science, and all of these things are too, primitive to them. They don't make sense to them. But there is something called a ghost, spirit, and there is something called a demon.
Okay.
Yeah, and they exist. Why do ghosts haunt a house? That's a different. That's a real good question. But we have in our sources in the Kabbalah, we have explanations for that too. Including a dibuk, the spirit that is possessing the body of another individual. Why does he do that? How does he have permission to do that? How do you get him out? Right? So this is an area that very few people really bother to study. We'll never find out about it, and even though it's fascinating, it's just another dimension out there that exists. And I have a whole lecture about it when I speak about UFOs, what they are or what they're not, and some of them are shady, Some people are not making up stories. Some are, but not everybody. To say everybody who said that they saw they're all making up a story, that doesn't make sense. Some people have a wild imagination. Some people want to get the credit for it. Some people think they saw something strange, but it could have been a weather balloon. But then you have the real stories. In all cultures, even in the Japanese culture. Because, you shouldn't say, only the Arabs see it, or only the Africans have seen it, or only the Middle East. No. If you speak to the Japanese, they know about these things. Sure. Yeah. So it's just, from time to time, we do see in Halacha certain ideas that are related to this subject that obviously some people will have a hard time trying to figure it out because they've never encountered that or they don't have any information about that. And they may be tempted to say, this is something in the past. This is not necessarily something in the past. It could be a problem too, today.
The Rambam seriously says that there are no such.
Right. The Rambam has a different approach to this whole topic, to the whole topic of mysticism, of which astrology and Shadim belongs to.
The Ramban, on the other hand.
The Ramban, of course, who we have a tradition, who learned the Kabbalah from Eliyahu Navi, would never say what the Rambam said.
He actually comments on the Rambam. He says, basically, not literally, but he says, I don't know what the Rambam is saying all these things for. I personally met that shit.
Exactly. And the Gaon of Vilna was much more adamant. Gaon of Vilna only passed away recently, and he said the Rambam, it could be the philosophy influenced his way of thinking. Now, I'm the type to give the benefit of the doubt. And my opinion is, at least partially, the Rambam came out against all these things and sometimes called them fairy tales, because he was concerned that people in certain parts of the world, Jews, are going to be again swept by avodah zarah of all types, and this will draw them away from Judaism, which is what the Torah is concerned with. What do these things do? They draw us away from our connection to Hashem. Do they exist? Of course, but be careful. So the Rambam preferred to use logic, common sense, and say, don't believe in it, don't think about it, it's nothing. Even though he cannot come out against clear Gemaras that talk about this. And about certain things he just said, they're no longer around. You don't have to worry about it. But like you said, Ilan, the Ramban, the Ibn Ezra, some of them who lived right before him, right after him, and even some of his contemporaries, they totally disagreed with him.
You know who claims to have actually seen one was Mayor of Basar. You remember Mayor of Basar?
Which one?
Mayor.
No.
Mayor, the brother of Charles of Basar.
Yeah. So what did he say?
So he was saying that he saw one once.
In which country?
I think it was.
Could be. Oh, sure. And there's all kinds of circumstances in which you can see, but it's not advisable to intentionally want to see them. But anyway, it is possible. It is something that we know about from our sources. It's just that people don't have the kelim, the tools, the means to relate to this properly, and they don't realize that even in the world of Shadim, there's all kinds of them. Did you ever know there's something called the Jewish shade?
Yes.
Yeah, so you know. A Jewish one? Yeah, the Gemara says so. Yeah.
That's why I know.
Yeah, for the Gemara. What makes them different? Did you know that some of them look more like animals, some of them look more like human beings, some of them don't have hair?
Some human beings look worse.
That's also, yeah. Right. So there's a lot of details to this, but you won't find them in your average Jewish book. No chapter about this.
Well, there's enough stuff to learn.
Yeah, Baruch Hashem, there's enough stuff to learn, right? Anyway, so we need to get back to our topic. All right, so some of these can present a problem, some of these chatzitas, and some of them not. Depending, a lot will depend on if people are makbid or not. Siv Zayin, לפלוף שחוץ לעין חוצץ. אפילו הולך, לפלוף שבעין אינו חוצץ. Lifluf, what is lifluf? In parentheses we see here pirush tzoat ha'ain. A secretion that comes out from the eye that could be a form of mucus. It could be pus also. But usually we're not talking about pus because pus is from an infection. Whereas lifluf has much more to do with the glands that continuously secrete all kinds of liquids around the eye. In this case, around the eye. So this lifluf, if it's right outside of the eye, it's chotzetz. Women don't want to have it there. Even if it's still lach, even if it's still moist. Lifluf that is inside the eye, eino chotzetz. If it's inside the eye, it's not a problem. It will wash away. They're not makbid on it. But if it's yavesh, but if it's already dry, then nobody wants it. Because nobody wants it, it's chotzetz. V'hu sheitchil lehorik. In other words, what does it mean that it's dry? It's already becoming green. In other words, it's gotten to a stage where it's hard enough to be considered something that is bothersome, something that nobody wants. The Shach has a whole veer over here, and where he mentions that many of the Rishonim hold, like the Girs of Rabbeinu Hanano, that a lot of these chatzitzas that are going to be mentioned, these seifim, are only a problem with taharas and not a woman for her husband. When a woman goes to Tefillah to be with her husband. He brings this down. But lemaskona, he says, of course, one needs to be machmir like the Shulchan Aruch, like the Mechaber. But if for whatever reason she cannot be toivel a second time, you could be lenient. Except for on the lifluch that's outside, that it's hard, outside the eye, he is machmir, that is for sure choitzet. In this particular example, that would be a chatzitza, if it's dry. Alright, in the next seif we have kachol. Kachol sheba'ain. Kachol means blue. Kachol means the blue color, but kachol, which is written the same way, is like an eyeliner or eyeshadow, I think they call it. It's basically what women use even today. Usually, it's done for beauty, right? Within the eye, around the eye, and sometimes it used to be done for medicinal purposes too, for refuah. So this kachol, this little bit of coloration that is smeared onto the eye, so if it's inside the eye, eno choitzets, again, either because it will be washed out through the eye rinsing it out, the tears, or we will see there's another pshat. V'shechutz la'ayin choitzets, but outside the eye it is choitzets. V'im hoysa potachas ve'otzemes, and if she was blinking a lot, that's one pshat in what it says over there. That if she was blinking, I think another pirush there is that if she was having a lot of tears, or if she was keeping her eyes open all the time. But here the Mechaber says, "Oisa potachas ve'otzemes," she was opening and closing all the time her eyes, todir at all times. Af shechutz la'ayin eino choitzitz. Even that which is outside the eye does not present a chatzitza. So what's going on over here? So the Mordechai brings down that in the case of inside the eye, you have the lachluchis, you have the liquid or the tears within the eye that moistens it, basically gets rid of it. The Meiri writes that the reason is because she wants the blue inside that eye for beauty purposes, and therefore it's not going to see, she wants it. Whereas outside of the eye, usually what most women do is they remove it, they don't want it to stay there. Or it's not for beauty purposes, and because of that, they're makbid on that. The idea behind, as we said in Hebrew, mematzmetzet, she blinks, or she opens her eyes a lot, that we said that even the kol outside is not choitzes. It could be that because there's so much tears coming out, she's opening and closing her eyes so often, that even that which is outside will eventually come off by itself, and therefore it's not choitzes. Or she's not makbid on it for whatever reason. Why would she not be makbid? Because it could be sometimes they want it to stay. They want that a little bit to be there, and they want it to stay. I mean, it's not choitzes. The Shach brings down over here b'shem the Bahag that all of this is not choitzes. That's dafka if she puts it on for kishut, for beauty. But if she puts it for refuah, it's choitzes, for medicine purposes. So again, it has to do with does she want it or not, and if it's for beauty purposes, she obviously wants it. Seif Tes, Yeah.
That should apply to anything, and not just the whole for the eye, but for any kind of salve or any kind of medicine or anything anywhere.
Well, we're going to see this idea of medicinal purposes is not so simple, because we're going to be talking about band-aids and...
No, I'm thinking about if this was put on as some kind of new coloring for this.
Yeah.
Today we put on all sorts of creams and...
Exactly, yeah.
It should be the same kind of logic.
Sure, yeah. It wouldn't necessarily just be applicable to that which is put on the eye.
Right.
Yeah, it could be something, yeah. And that leads us to the next sieve, which talks about all sorts of injuries that now have formed a scab, or there's dry blood. So there's something there that shouldn't be there. Or well, I should say it should be there, because that's the process of healing, but it's not something that we wanted to be there. So the Mechaber says in Sif Tes, that dom yovesh ala makkah choitzes, that if it's dry blood on the makkah it's choitzes, but the rir shebetoicho eino choitzes, any of the mucus, any of the liquids inside of the wound is not choitzes. Yotzo harir metoicho, the rir came out from the wound. Kol toich gimel yomim lachu, within 3 days it's considered moist. Ve'eino choitzes, and it's not choitzes. La'acham mikan, after 3 days it's already yovesh, it's already dry, the choitzes, and it therefore is a chatzitza. A woman that has a lot of scabs, hard skin, needs to soften it up with water until they're soft. Here, this also follows a Mishnah, and there's various Rishonim here, various opinions as to what exactly is choitzes and why is it choitzes. Isn't it part of the body or not? In general, as far as scabs are concerned, a lot of Rishonim say that a scab is not really a chatzitza. As Rashi says that, especially in the first few days, the scab is soft. As long as it's soft, it's part of the body. Chazon Ish also gives a whole explanation about this, that he brings down the Razon, who calls a scab part of the skin of the human being. So if that's the case, it's really part of him. It's not something apart that should be choitzitz. So that's one explanation for scabs, especially the soft ones. In the Mordechai, he says that a scab is not choitzes because even though it's a hard shell, the water gets through. But a scab that has become hard, what we do today is that we tell the women to remove it, unless there's a lot of tsar, if there's a lot of pain involved. So some are machmer, they remove the scabs anyway, even if it hurts a little bit. The Shuchan Aruch over here just says that it would be sufficient to soften them, and that would be, you wouldn't have to remove them. Shevet Alevi says something very interesting. Sometimes you're worse off removing a scab, because what happens when you remove a scab? The blood's going to come out, right? The mucus is going to come out, and it's going to form another scab. So you're not really gaining anything, you're making things worse. You're going to make new chatzitzas. So
why is the second scab worse than...
No, so he says, in other words, you don't gain anything. If anything, the other one may be more of a problem than what you have right now. Now, I don't know if it's more, exactly, it's similar. But in other words, you're not gaining anything by removing this one right now, unless there's no pus inside. Unless it's easy to remove, it's not very painful, it's going to come off, and no new scabs are going to be there.
So in the mice, you say...
He's not machmir to peel off the scab.
Are we machmir today that to remove scabs? Is that considered a good practice?
It all depends. If it's very dry and there's no pus inside and it's not painful, yes, we do.
It's already peeling off anyway.
Yes, yeah. It's not. If it's not painful, there's no pus inside.
It's already peeling off, but normally
it's dry. Yeah,
as a function.
That's what we do.
The healing process.
Yeah.
So really, you're deferring the healing process. You're interfering with the healing process of the skin. So that's why I'm surprised that anyone would want to be machmir when it's a question of health.
Yeah, well, a lot of places are machmir, and that's basically the halacha, that if it's not painful, there's no pus going to come out of it, you take it off.
The Shalom wants to know if we're talking about softening the scab in the mikvah water.
Oh, I thought he wants to know about the shadim.
No? No? Maybe also.
Oh, no,
Maybe also.
Yeah,
we'll see what he says to that.
As far as what?
Because he can hear you.
Yeah.
Don't forget.
Yes.
So the question, well, when Tahachapi, do they have shadim?
Yeah, in the mountains.
In the mountains, it's likely.
Sure.
possible.
It
Yeah,
used
sure.
to be more.
Yeah.
He wanted to know if the softening of the scab is done in the water of the mikveh itself.
No, it's prior to entering, everything is taken care of. Yes. Sif Yud Retir Shalamaka Chotzetzes. A bandage on a makkah is a chatzitza. The Achronim have a problem with this.
Something that you want to be there, is that right?
Yeah, she's not makbid. She's not makbid to remove it. She wants it there.
But wouldn't you say something about a scab? She wants it there.
Not really. She would rather, some talk about it. It's a good question. Some say that she would rather not have the makkah and not have the scab. Yeah, whatever. So anyway, so
you're not removing the makkah, though.
Yeah. But so you'll understand from the explanation of retio that it's a little bit different than a scab. The Levush says, the Gaber retio, that everybody's makbid to remove it. When? As soon as she will heal, as soon as she will recover. So since this is something that everybody doesn't want there, and as soon as she will heal, it will be removed. That's one explanation given. That's why Retia is always going to be chotzetzes, even though right now she's not makbid. In other words, since eventually it will be removed, it's not like part of her body. Whereas with the geled, a scab, you could tie it. It's really like part of the skin, So it's less of a problem according to those who are matir, according to the opinion that says a scab is okay. So we're machmir to remove him too, if possible. So, but with a retia, which is a foreign object that is eventually going to be removed, it's not part of the body. That is going to be more of a chatzitza.
But nevertheless, certainly there are situations which it can't be.
Right,
So
which we'll be talking about, which also applies to a cast. Exactly. Now the Shut Chasam Sofer says, you know why a retia is different? Is because you occasionally do remove it, either to check on the wound or to clean it. So you're taking it off several times. So because of that, it's a chatzitza. What if it's a retia for a longer period of time where you're not going to be removing it? So you don't have this removal thing. It's going to stay there stuck for a while. The poskim seem to be machmir too, unless it's a situation where a woman has no way out of it. She's not going to go to the tefillah for a long time. Maybe we'll talk about it next time. Or in a couple of weeks, what does she do? She has a cast on her leg, on her hand, or somewhere. And well, some of them, the water can get through. Some of them not.
Some of them can't get wet.
Right. And some of them can get wet. What do you do? Yeah. But for the time being, we can talk about a simpler area, which is simpler to handle, and that is contact lenses. They didn't have that back then. So they didn't have the question, but today we have this question. What do you do about contact lenses that is an object in the eye that is removed or removable? So it makes a difference. Pashut, any contact lenses that can be taken out needs to be taken out.
How would you have contact lenses that cannot be taken out?
If it's a permanent lens.
Oh, that's something else.
Right,
That's a contact lens also? Permanent lens?
Yeah, they have a permanent, There are contact lenses that are not made to be removed for a while. Lechatchila, everybody says that contact lenses should be removed. And even those that are not removed for a while could possibly be a problem. So the question arises, what happens if she didn't? Okay, so that seems to be a kula. There seems to be a leniency in that, because technically they're not glued to the eyes. So even though the woman closes her eyes, she's not really closing them so tightly shut where this would be a problem. So it is like the waters can get there. So we're not going to be makbid on hers if she didn't remove them. But if she does have them, she should remove them before she enters the tefillah. Okay, we'll continue in Mitzvah next week.